All right, attribution time with Jenn Steele. I am so excited that you're here, Jenn. Thank you for hopping on. We connected just through, LinkedIn, but your background is extensive in the marketing world and attribution world, and you were a part of Visible back in the day for a quick stint there as well. But yeah, I'm so excited to have you. This is going to be a fun session to have. Give a little intro what you're doing right now.
Sure, sure. So after having, as you said, extensive background, which I'm pretty sure is short for being a startup person and bouncing from company to company with as promotions, et cetera, went. Most recently, I was the CEO of Kissmetrics, and I turned around and sold that company. And now I am starting a new company that's basically, you could consider it the gig economy for salespeople. So it's called SoundGTM, and it's interesting because I haven't even thought about attribution yet. I'm just like, do we have a website?
Yeah.
We're pretty early here.
yeah, attribution is not even in the picture, and that's okay. But what those who've listened to this podcast kind of know there's a formula to how we approach it. Of how are you doing attribution? What's the future hold? You have such a fun perspective of attribution because of your experience of the different places in which you've been. And as we were connecting a few weeks ago, you had some really fun, I guess, horror stories of how people approach attribution. And I think that's going to be good for people to hear. Like, large organizations, have a unique approach, and doesn't mean it's right or wrong, or maybe it does mean it's wrong, and it's just no one calls them out on it. So, yeah, you had some fun ones, and I don't know where to begin or which one you want to start with, but I thought that was just a fun way to kind of run the show.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I always love actually sharing my horror stories because I'm like, just don't do it the way I tried. Try it, like make your own mistakes. At least I can save you from mine. So I'm always happy to tell people what I did wrong. Just to kind of set these up, when I came into Visible, it was like my whole world changed because I had actually built my own attribution models or tried to build my own attribution models in Excel. I got to Visible and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually a big data problem that I've been trying to solve with small data. Like you can't really build an attribution model in Excel if you have more than 5 people in your company, just because the data is too much to truly do it correctly. So to me, working at Visible was an absolute revelation. We got acquired by Marketo. At the same time, Madison Logic wanted to make me their CMO. Obviously took that job, but it was interesting because I brought in Visible, and I was, negotiated a great price on it too, because also duh. But what I didn't do was think things through. And this is where the horror story kind of begins.
Break that down.
So I brought in Visible. I was told by my executive team that everybody believed in Visible because we had been partners. And so I kind of breezed my way in with attribution models everywhere, and nobody understands it at all. Because in fact, they had no attribution model at all. And where Visible's attribution model was super, super strong, if you tracked your revenue in Salesforce, we tracked most of our actual recognized revenue because we were not a SaaS company in NetSuite. Visible didn't have the NetSuite integration. So here I am going like, we're getting a 350% marketing ROI on marketing, and it's numbers nobody believes, because it turns out we could only, and this was something obviously I learned because of course I like hit the ground running with Visible and all this stuff. It turns out that there was a difference between the booked revenue in Salesforce and the recognized revenue for finance, and I couldn't make those meet. So at some point I was just like, fine, what works for you? And that's where it is. And that's where my current philosophy is: the best attribution model is whatever the hell people will agree to.
It's really that simple, right? It really is like, what is it that you will like from the top down? What is it that we agreed to, that we say this is the source of truth for us, and then run off of that. So often it's the inverse of marketing goes out, buys a tool, does all these things to try to prove a point, and then it's like, well, you've missed the mark because you didn't even ask us what we cared about, right? And it's just
the fact is that the tool I needed inside my own marketing team. Where I went wrong was trying to then translate that to the executive level when, as I said, they weren't tracking even sourced and influenced, which are like the classic 101 stuff. And so, I was given some pretty good coaching advice, shall we say, by my boss, who was the CEO, basically saying, maybe we need to go through the influenced model before we can understand a true attribution model. And I, of course, because I had been so steeped in the visible rhetoric, I mean, I was co-head of marketing there, right? I was kind of offended by that. Like, why would we do something that's wrong? And yeah, as I said, that's when I started to evolve to my current position, which is whatever the heck we can agree on is what we can use.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because so often when I think about attribution, I can break it down into like my conversation, or how even my language changes when I know I'm talking to a smaller organization or a medium size or an enterprise, and when and so to your point, like I'll say, well, if I'm a SMB business and we're not doing sourced, let's go do source. Like, let's just start there, right? And you're talking about Medicine Logic, which was doing really well at this point, right? I mean, like, and even
they
then,
had a great exit event at the end of last year. Like, phenomenal. They're kicking butt, and they're still a phenomenal product. But I don't know that they're visible customers anymore. So,
Well, especially when you have disparate data points. That's, the common theme, right? When you ask someone about how do you do really good attribution, your data has to be all like really clean, all in one place. And I think a lot of tools are getting into that point where, there's being a more of a flattening of sorts for data, right? We'll ingest it all, we'll flatten it, we'll take it all, and then we'll process it for you. And that's the future of attribution. But for those, companies that really are starting from nothing, and you have just a Salesforce or a HubSpot or whatever, it's like there's a base in which you can build off of.
I love HubSpot to pieces. I was early HubSpot. I was employee like number 90-ish. Love them to pieces. Hate their attribution. I'm like, where does this come from? I can't trust your data. Where did you even get this? What's going on? I just ignore it.
Yes, I would agree with that. We won't go down that path too much, but agree with that sentiment. So speaking of source, you mentioned source. You had a great horror story about source. So we say, like, source is important, right? It's a valid thing in the world of attribution, but
it can
go wrong pretty quick, it seems like.
It can go nightmarishly wrong.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
So I'm going to leave this company nameless to protect the guilty. So I was head of marketing. Just to set, like, I've been head of marketing at enough companies that people can just go and guess. But
the moment Jenn talks, just assume head of marketing. We'll just start with that, right?
Except for the last year or two, So I was head of marketing, and we were measuring on the sourced revenue field, the sourced field on the, I think it was on the opportunity record. Okay, and Salesforce. So we were using Salesforce, and there was a source field on opportunity. I'd been at the company for a little bit because I was still, getting my bearings, and it was pretty early stage, and so like nothing was set up. And then I learned a couple of things that made this a very interesting field. Number one, it was often set by hand.
Right.
Like they would pull it from the contact record on conversion sometimes. And of course, I was using the HubSpot to Salesforce, and so it was sometimes getting pushed over. But it was also being really, really frequently set by hand. And then number two, for some reason, our sales reps would close opportunities every 90 days and then open a new one if they were actively working it. They were not supposed to do this. The exec team was mystified when we discovered that this was getting done. Like, this was just bizarre. We're like, why are you doing this?
Shocker that sales was doing something that no one knew about, right?
It was I was like, wait, I found this out like at a conference from sales reps when they were working the booth and I was checking in and they were complaining about it. I'm like, you're doing what? You're doing what? So, and then of course, when you would open the second opportunity, it would default to sales as the source because the theory was, okay, you opened a second opportunity.
Yeah.
Clearly that was sourced by sales. Our numbers were so ghastly, dreadfully, terribly wrong. And I had brought in another attribution tool that shall remain nameless, and I couldn't track a huge amount with it, unfortunately, but I could show marketing influence on opportunities. I don't love the sourced influence and the influence model because technically, depending on how you create the data, I can influence anything I want, but at least the influence would track a campaign touch on an opportunity. So at least then I could be like, what did we touch? What's our coverage, etc. And I also don't love using sourced as a sales versus marketing because I'm like, we shouldn't be versus anything. We should be running plays together.
Yeah.
So I looked into all of this. I'm like, okay, I assume we're doing that because we're a pretty early startup and this is just how somebody set it up. So I went into an exec team meeting, and this is where the horror story really starts. If you didn't think it already started. And I just very easily was like, hey, we're using this field. Doesn't make any sense. So we're going to convert over to using influenced. Okay. I think this is going to be like a 2-second conversation because why would we use a data field with demonstrably wrong data?
Yeah.
Nope. I lobbed a grenade. The next 30 minutes were full of people telling me how ridiculous it was. And I was just, I didn't have arguments prepared.
Yeah.
I didn't
you
have,
weren't expecting that this would be pushback. Like,
I'm like, there's crappy data here. Wow, this isn't ideal. There's less crappy data here. Why don't we start looking at the non-crappy data? And no, in fact, it was at the point that instead of just going over and just looking at what I had, like what my systems were reporting, and then we could just easily pass that into Salesforce, the ops team pulled their folks off of other projects to go through and validate the hand-coded data.
Wow.
Hilariously, and I know this is shocking from what we just talked about, marketing suddenly had sourced a lot more opportunities.
Interesting. Yeah, imagine that.
But
that.
The worst part of this was that and then, later my boss, the CEO, was just like, you didn't approach that right. I'm like, I didn't know I was like violating somebody's religion.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I was like, oh, we're a data-driven company. Let's just do this. Oh, was that a mistake on my part? Please do not make that mistake. And that is when I firmly came into the camp of the best attribution model is whatever the hell people will agree on.
Yes, I will quote you on that. I think if I were to ever, if we do a book together, that could be the name of the book easily. Like, it's just that's really what it boils down to. And you have to start from the top and move your way down in that.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's a belief system almost, right?
Yeah.
In this case, I'd had founders who were in MarTech at the early days when all we had was sourced. And so that was what they like based their entire, and I hate to say this, but almost belief system on.
Yeah.
You think it's data, but it's not. I mean, I'm Jewish. It's not as extensive as my religion, but it is still very much almost a religious belief. And you can accidentally almost start a holy war, as I found out.
Yeah.
If you're not careful.
Well, it's interesting because it's like,
but
you get to a point in where if you read enough like HBR articles and stuff like that, there's this very specific KPIs in which people run off of, and it's just it really hasn't changed a ton. Like, and I'm not trying to bash HBR, but it's like the reality is, like, if I read a strategy article and then I read, from 5 years ago and I read it now, not much has changed, right? It's, the idea of how to run a strategic and go-to-market motion is very much the same in this mindset. And it's this top-down approach of like, he needs very specific objectives to hit and this and that. And so to your point, like that idea of source just resonates, and it worked then and it's going to work now. And it just continues this process. And
except it was BS then.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's less BS now. But as I just said, Not always.
No, yeah, yeah. And it went into, when we met previously, like one of the big things like that we see with attribution modeling in general is, this, you go from sourced to modeling, and there's a discrepancy where more often than not, you take away from spend quite a bit, right? All these dollars that go into, I'm going to spend into Google Ads or Bing or whatever your, ad platform is. And that becomes somewhat of a scary thing for marketers at times, because what it shows is like you can spend less money, which is kind of the sales pitch for marketing attribution. Hey, spend less
Right.
money to produce more revenue. But that is also this scary underlying thing that no one wants to talk about, because it's like, well, that means then I have less money that's going to come into my department. And it's like, no, just utilize those dollars elsewhere. Like, yeah.
Right. Right.
But that's sometimes more work to do
Yeah.
that, right?
Although I always say if you attribute it right, events go from looking like huge money spenders to huge money makers.
Yeah.
Usually, because
Yeah.
there's
That's
usually
good.
some really key touches. And if your sales team's working them right, they're closing something right afterwards. And so you've got a really interesting, like, late touch model for your events that shows that you should go. Well, they're
Yeah.
expensive. So reallocating based on a robust attribution model can really help with things like that.
Yeah, and hopefully what it does from a go-to-market perspective is it shows you, hey, sales and marketing can put some money into something together, right? And I think events are a perfect example of that, right? Marketing is going to invest in this, but sales is going to come in, they're going to connect, like, and they could do, a little workshop or something like that. And
Right.
it's one of those where like the money allocation becomes something where it's evenly distributed to say, hey, we can do this together, rather than, well, I know I can get marketing dollars because if I just pour money into ad spend,
Right.
it's my marketing dollars. And again, it's
Right.
just this mind shift of how we have to change that, because again, it's based on
Yeah.
source, and that's the source, and we can just run that.
Yeah, except that the most effective marketing actually doesn't have to do with the source. I worked with a
Yeah.
sales leader once that I totally agreed with, and he said outbound drives inbound. Like,
Mhm.
especially for, like, okay, not Adobe, it's a known brand, right?
Yeah, it's huge.
But
Right.
especially for any of us who don't have a household name as a brand, people haven't heard of you, and then they get some nudges from outbound and from their BDRs, from the sales team, from the prospectors, whatever that is, and slowly your brand bubbles up, and
Yeah.
now they're not going to reply to your salespeople because nobody wants to do that, but they'll Google you, and then the next thing you know, they're downloading a white paper, they're doing all, or signing up for a webinar or whatever it is. And I couldn't agree with him more. I think outbound drives inbound. And that's where you can't look at it as who did what. You have to look at it as we ran a play together. And I know it's easy for me to say now as CEO because I don't really care where the revenue comes from. I just want it to come in.
Yeah.
But nothing is 1 + 1 really does equal 3, to use a way overused cliche. Sales plus marketing, like, when you have strength in both of those, you're going to close more deals faster.
Yeah.
And so the last thing you want to do is use attribution to
Yeah.
say, no, mine.
Yeah. Create this division. Yeah. That's what I think is so interesting about the product-led growth or PLG movement that we're seeing right now, and some of these tools that are promoting that. And that what you were saying really resonates with, outbound produces inbound type of, obviously it's that word of mouth, it's that growth mindset. And some PLG are like, it's just solely product drives the growth. But if there's sales involved, if it's done right, I think there's a lot of value in that. And so, yeah, that really resonates. That's a good, that's good insight. Well, very cool, Jen. This is phenomenal. I hope a lot of people take away some insight around attribution, that yes, it can be done wrong, but here's some lessons of what to gather from that. I
Learn
just
from
think,
my mistakes.
yes, learn from Jen. I think, your insight is so solid. Any plug about what's going on? You kind of touched on Stealth Startup and what's going on there. If anyone's interested in learn more, where can they go? What can they do?
Yeah. Yeah. So personally, I am Jenn Steele on all platforms, although I have left Twitter X behind. But LinkedIn is where I'm most active when I have any time. And it's literally LinkedIn /in/Jenn Jenn Steele, JENNSTEELE. And then my company helps people fill their pipeline by, as I said, using outsourced sales, kind of gig economy, or you can call it an affiliates model. You know, we're so new that we're still figuring out terminology, and you can find that at soundgtm.com.
Awesome.
And more than anything, I want feedback. So if you go, granted, there's a coming soon site right there, but yeah, would love people's thoughts on models like that.
Love it. Thanks so much, Jen. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.